Okay, so I'm going to start the recording, and I want to let all of you know again that we don't answer questions during the session because we want to make sure that we hit our timing as best as we can, and we want a more robust conversation at the end. But we will share this recording with you, and we have lots of handouts that we're going to share with you. We want to make sure you have a pencil, paper, and some or a pencil, pen, paper, etc. Because the questions that we're going to ask you are for you to participate. So we have some things that we want you to, yes, exactly. We want you all to get your hands in the clay. So what I'm going to do without further ado is that I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to get going. Can everybody see that okay? Good. Okay. So welcome to Strategic Storytelling #1. This is all about creating more effective communications in your work as an advocate to create safer streets for everybody. I'm only going to very briefly let you know so you recognize Jim and I as your teachers today, because we are going to go a little bit more into who we are as we teach. And also, I shared our bios with you in the newsletters that I've sent you. And I want to give a shout out quickly to our very generous, lovely Trina Willerton and It Could Be Me for sponsoring this series of classes. And also, Trini's going to talk a little bit later in relation to some of the really exciting things that she's got going on and how storytelling is working for her in her work. So I want to thank everybody. You are doing such brave, important work, and we are so thrilled to have you take time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. And we have an agreement. And that is because we are not mental health experts. We are media specialists and storytelling experts. We know that many of you have been involved in crashes yourself, but we're going to ask today that you don't go into details of that because we're going to be hands in the clay about storytelling itself. And that is going to help you tell your story better. But we want to make sure that we don't trigger anybody if we can help it. So what we're going to specifically cover today is first, I'm going to talk about why communications need to be part of your strategic plan. Then Jim is going to talk about finding the right story, and I'll go into more details about exactly what you can do to have more effective and compelling stories. So we want you, if you haven't done it already, we invite you this year to create a strategic plan for you and your organization, even if you're an organization of just one. And in that strategic plan, we want to ask you to please include communications and media strategy as part of that communications, as well as storytelling. So I thought I would get some experts in this to get a quote from, and this is the Vera Foundation. They were founded in 1961 to help end mass incarceration of people of color, immigrants, and people who are just experiencing poverty. So a lot of people that are in jail for no good reason at all, sadly, but true. And this is what they had to say, and I will read it very quickly for you. A media and communication strategy is crucial to supporting advocacy, mobilizing supporters and the public, and motivating policymakers about the issues that matter to their constituents. Media coverage often brings visibility to the need for and the impact of universal representation and increases public pressure for a program. So that's exactly why you want to have a strategy and you want communications to be part of it. So the very first exercise that we're going to have for you today is I just want you to take a minute or two, and I'm going to time us. And what I want you to do is, if you didn't write down a current strategic goal, I asked you about that when I sent out the email newsletter for the registration. Go ahead and write that down right now. So take a minute, like take two, I'm going to time us, and just write down a strategic goal that's important for you and your advocacy work this year. So go ahead and do that. And like I said, I'm going to time us. So just take a minute or two to write down exactly what one of your strategic goals is for this year. And this is something that we're going to use throughout today's class, so don't toss it away. Go ahead and keep that. And if you'd like, please go ahead and share it in the text box as well, because we'd love to inspire each other. And if you have more than one strategic goal this year, fantastic. Go ahead and write any of them that you have time to write down. Okay, so we just have about 40 seconds left to go. Wrap that up, and we're going to get ready to go on to what Jim has to share with us. So 30 seconds to go. Wrap up what your a strategic goal is for this year. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jim. And Jim, I'm going to be your going to turn the slides for you. So just tell
Yeah.
me when you want to do that. But we want to move forward and have you share what you have for us today.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. It's really good to see you. I want to echo what Melissa said about the value of the work that you're doing. This is incredibly important. And so I applaud you and really appreciate being able to be here today with you. Um, As you probably noticed, storytelling has been having a moment now for quite a while, and it has a lot of different meanings. We hear about storytelling, of course, in the fictional sense. We think about storytelling as library reading hours, storytelling in movies and television, for example. We even think about it in terms of design. We hear about the story told by a building design or an interior design. We even hear it sometimes used to describe food. You know, what story are we telling by the food that we're serving? And so it can be confusing when we use the word story and storytelling because it can conjure up all these meanings. For today's purposes, I want to talk about storytelling as the recounting of a human experience for strategic purposes. And I'm going to break that down a little bit as we go. But essentially, what we're doing is putting a human face on the issues that we're working with. We're used to hearing those issues being discussed in terms of data or policy or legalese or budgets, but we all know that these issues have human impacts. And so what we do with stories helps to put a human face on these issues. Next slide, please. And the reason for putting a human face on these issues is that we are hardwired for stories as organisms. When we hear a story, the motor and sensory cortices are engaged, and at the same time, our brains release excess dopamine, which makes it easier for us to remember something with greater accuracy. And once a story has sustained our attention long enough, we may begin to emotionally resonate with the story's characters. This is something called transportation, which is a great term for our discipline. But Melissa's going to talk more about that. But it basically means that the listener is transported into the world of the story. And, you know, when I finally got my head around this as an advocate, I realized that storytelling was really my superpower because it cuts through to the listener directly in ways that reciting data or reciting policy or making a legal argument simply doesn't do. Next slide, please. So then the question is, what story is the right one to use for our work? And it's tempting to begin by kind of running through our list of people who might have stories or stories that we think are worth telling. And I would like to propose that we back up a little bit and be more strategic about how we get to that story. Melissa and I have used this particular process in working with clients to gather stories. So we've worked with the Vision Zero Network, we worked with the San Luis Obispo Council of Governments, we worked with the Multnomah County Department of Health, we've worked with Shasta Living Streets, which is a local advocacy organization in Northern California, to gather stories for their purposes. And so we kind of landed on this process as the way to lead us to the right stories for the purpose. And think of this as gathering information as you go. So we really start with the goal. So let's switch to the next slide, please. And the first question to ask here is,
Sorry, get a little freezing here. What's it doing? Sorry, you guys. I don't know why it wants to do that. I'm going to stop sharing for just a second and get it and see if I can get it to unfreeze by going back again. I will try that. Okay, oops, sorry.
no,
There we
it's
go.
working. So the first question to ask yourself is, what is your goal? What is the specific problem you're trying to solve or the change you're trying to make? And I would suggest that you want to be as specific possible. Are you trying to get a signal installed at an intersection? Are you trying to get a crosswalk painted outside of a school? Are you trying to get a sidewalk installed, an off-street biking and walking path? So think specifically about what your goal is, and then while you're at it, think about who would benefit most from this solution or the change. And this is going to lead us to the stories that are going to be the most fruitful for that discussion. So once you have, and I would say be as specific as possible about your goal. We would like a world in which everyone can has the choice to ride a bike or walk or take public transit. I want to drill down to the specific thing that you want to accomplish to get you towards that ultimate goal. So next slide, please. Once you have a goal in mind, ask yourself, who do you need to influence? And by this, I mean whose action is absolutely essential for achieving your goal. So you may need, you may want the whole community to support your project. That's a good overarching long-term goal. But to get there, you might need the majority of your city council to vote yes, and you might need the mayor's support. Or you might need the support of a school principal to get a safe routes to school plan adopted, or you may need the majority of the school board. And think in terms of whose role is absolutely critical. It's nice to have everybody, but think about that one person who, if they don't give their support or don't don't act on your behalf, it won't happen. So get very, very specific about that. And then as you're thinking about that person, who do they listen to? Are they, if you're talking about your city's mayor, are they especially connected to the business community? Are they especially connected to labor unions, teachers? Are they small business people? And while you're thinking about who they listen to, think about who they cannot afford to ignore. And what you're doing here is you're narrowing down your list of sources of stories and types of stories. When I was the communications director at CalBike, we introduced the first, California's first attempt at enacting a 3-foot passing law in California. And that's a law that would establish a minimum passing distance for cars passing bicycles in the street. And in thinking about the audience, there were really two groups that we absolutely had to get. Of course, we had to get the governor to sign the bill. It wouldn't become law if we didn't get the governor to sign the bill. But that bill would not reach the governor if we did not win the approval of the transportation committees in the California Assembly and the California Senate. And then furthermore, we realized we weren't going to get any Republican support for this bill. And it just so happens because of the politics in California, the Republicans as a group typically don't support bills carried by Democrats who have the majority in the legislature. So what we really needed was a majority of the Assembly Transportation Committee and the Senate Transportation Committee. It's about, I think it was 8 people on each committee would be a majority. And so we focused on that 16 or so Democrats who we thought were persuadable. And we knew they were persuadable because they either supported bills in the past or they were friendly to the author of the bill. So we had a very specific target as we began gathering stories for this campaign. So you want to think about who you need to lobby and be very strategic about who's the very most important person who can move the dial for you. Next slide, please. This is where we start to focus on the story that's going to be useful for your purposes. So you know what your goal is, you know who your audience is and what you want them to do. You want them to vote yes, you want them to vote, you may want them to vote no. Maybe there's a project that would negatively affect walking and biking. You might need them to vote no. But you know what you want them to do, and you also know a little bit about who they listen to and what kinds of things they respond to. And now you can focus on the story. So the question really is, what story is needed, knowing what you know about your goal and your audience? What kind of story most clearly illustrates the problem or the needed change? So for example, if you're talking about advocating for a crosswalk at an elementary school, it might not be useful to use a story about a recreational cyclist on an off-street walking and biking path. That's kind of a silly example, but you might have a really good story about a recreational cyclist, but that's not germane to the issue that you're trying to address. So you want to think about what kind of story most clearly illustrates the problem. And then also knowing, you've identified your target audience. Let's say it's the mayor and you know that the mayor is a mom with small kids. Well, what is the story that's most likely to touch that mayor? It's probably going to be stories about families and kids. So you can start to see how we've kind of started to narrow down to the category of stories that that are going to be the most useful. And I just want to say a few words about what constitutes a story in this context. It could be, depending on the issue you're trying to address, it could be a story about a person who was hit or injured or killed. That could be a story that you want to tell. But not all valuable stories are negative stories. So for example, we had a project on a main shopping street here in Sacramento where I live, where business owners were frustrated that pedestrians couldn't cross the street safely because there were 3 lanes of traffic and no crosswalks. And so for them, there was a positive opportunity from installing these crosswalks, which also created an opportunity we were going to reduce the number of traffic lanes from 3 to 2 and add a protected bike lane. So in this case, the stories were all about benefits to businesses. So that's a potentially positive story to say, we love what businesses enjoy over on L Street and we want it on J Street. And so remember that stories can be positive. Same goes for example, let's say there's a residential development going in and you're advocating for a greenway network. I see one person has posted, Sophia, you had posted about greenway funding. That's a positive opportunity, right? So the stories for that could be very positive. And remember, what we know about stories and brain chemistry is that that positive story is going to engage your audience and it's going to inspire them. It's going to create empathy. It's going to connect them emotionally to the issue. So with that in mind, next slide, please. We get to the question of how do you tell it? In other words, how will you be communicating with your target audience about the problem you're trying to solve or the change you're trying to make? And the reason this is important is that you've got a lot of different ways you can tell the story. So back to this example about the 3-foot passing law in California, we knew that we needed to get yes votes from 8 members of the Senate and Assembly Transportation Committees. So I did some online searches and I talked to local bike advocates and I identified at least one person in each district of those representatives who had been severely injured or killed by a passing collision. And sadly, of course, we know that this is a fairly an all too common type of collision. And I was able to find a story that occurred in the district of every one of those members. And so what I did with those stories was I wrote them up as sort of one-page handouts, and I created a file with 16 of these stories, and then when I communicated with that legislator, usually by email or also by snail mail, I would include the fact sheet. I also took those stories and I put them on our website, so I had one page that just had all the stories um, of these collisions. So those are two ways that I was telling that story. And then, of course, I would have those stories in mind. If I was talking to any of those legislators, I could just bring it up and talk to them. The how here is important because you might have one story that is useful for in a bunch of different media. So I would invite you to think about how could you tell that story in 2 minutes at the podium at your city council meeting? How would you tell that story in a face-to-face meeting with a city council member? How would you tell that story in a news interview or an op-ed that you write? How would you tell that story in a social media post? If you had to tell that story in 5 sentences, how would you tell it? So you want to think about the story as material, and then you want to think about all the different ways you use it. In other words, there isn't just one way to tell that story. Um, so again, examples could be telling the story in a one-on-one meeting, testimony before the city council, in a letter, in a social media post, on your website, in a blog. You get the picture. Um, and so I want to wrap up by picking up a thread that Melissa started when she was talking about your strategic goal. And that is take a moment to think about the person or the group that you absolutely need to influence in order to accomplish that strategic goal. Is it the mayor? Is it a majority of the city council? Is it a key business owner? Is it the director of the parks district? Is it a school principal? Who that is depends on your project, but take a moment right now and think about that strategic goal that you just wrote down. And now who is it that you would need to influence in order to get them on your side? And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Melissa.
Okay, so, I apologize, Jim, that I think I slide that we wanted to have there for people to take a moment, but we will have that question at the end, so it's very important that you jot those things down, but we'll give you more time to do that at the end as well. So now I'm gonna touch very lightly on a couple of things that Jim went into and go more deeply into some other aspects of important things for stories. So Jim talked about stories working because they change brain chemistry, which breeds compassion, and that can motivate people to more positive action. So let's look at some of the brain chemistry things that a well-told story does. So these are stories that have tried and true story structures that are compelling to the human brain. And there's only about 8 different types of stories around the world throughout time. So these stories, when they're well crafted, even if they're super short one sentence stories or they're a novel that you read all weekend, do the same things. and they release hormones and neurotransmitters, such as cortisol, which is the stress hormone that super focuses your attention, oxytocin, which is the feel-good hormone that makes you feel empathy and want to do something about whether it's adopt a dog or put that intersection in at that grade school. And then dopamine. And dopamine is a neurotransmitter and it does two really important things. First, when you read a story or engage with a story, it actually gives you the sense of accomplishment as if you were part of the story. So that's why you feel like you did something great after you binge watched your favorite murder mystery series over a weekend. And it also makes stories easier to remember. So if I asked you what the main theme of your favorite story when you were 5, you could probably tell me. You probably couldn't remember all of your data points. So data is important, but you've got to wrap your data with storytelling in order to make it engaging and memorable for your audience. So first you want to start with your Jim talked about your goal. You always want to make sure when you're telling a story for advocacy that you know what your purpose is. So it's very clear, but it's easy to forget. What do you want people to do because they hear this story from you? And as Jim talked about it, what's in it for your audience? How are you going to meet them where they are right now? So let's continue on that thread that he started about an elementary school. So let's say that you are going to be speaking to a parent-teacher association. How are you going to tell not only a story, but a story where you let them know where you have commonality? How will you make them feel seen, heard, and matter? So, for example, if you were a parent at that school, you could talk about and you know that speeding is a problem, and you know that parents bringing their kids to school and being distracted and almost running over other people's children. You could talk about, for example, that you used to use that street before you had children as a cut through, and you kind of pushed it on the speed limit, and other things that people that are kind, good, decent citizens think is okay behavior once you're behind the wheel of a car. So you could find that commonality with them, and that is really important to help moving them along with you. Next, as I said, the stories that are compelling to human brains have very specific shapes and structures. You do not have to reinvent the wheel, and you can just plug your story into one of the classic shapes and structures, and that will help make it much more compelling. So the difference between an anecdote and a story is this structure. An anecdote is what a lot of us say, let me tell you a story. And what we're really telling you is, let me tell you how annoying it was when I tried to return this item at Target last week. Or let me tell you, whatever it is, and we say that's a story. For advocacy purposes, we need a more official structure because we want to, again, change brain chemistry and get people on our side to do something. So at minimum, your story needs a beginning, a middle, and an end, but it also, to be really compelling, needs more of a structure. So we teach at Petal Love the hero's journey structure. As Jim said, he realized that storytelling was his superpower. It can be any of your superpowers. Anyone from any age and any background can become a compelling and effective storyteller if you will just commit to doing it. And so we teach something called the Advocate's Story Map. And our next storytelling class in a month from now will go deep into that. But today, at the end of this class, I will share with you my storytelling map. So hero's journey stories are not about winning. They are about transformation, as much internal as external. That's why we think they're so important for advocates, because that's exactly what you want to do. You want to share your own transformation to help transform your community, your state, your country into a place that has safe streets for all modes of travel. And inside that hero's journey, there is something called the hero's transformation, which we can also call an aha moment. Remember I said that maybe you were a parent who was new parent, you have a young child, now you realize why it's important to follow the speed limit when you're on that school street or any street, frankly. But before that, when you were just a busy working professional trying to get to work on time, you used it as a cut through street and you didn't realize it was a problem. Suddenly you have a 5-year-old that has to cross that street and you go, oh my gosh, I was part of the problem. So, in a hero's journey, it's all about when you saw the world anew, or who you're telling the story about saw the world anew, and that allows oxytocin to happen for your audience to see the world anew with you. That is the superpower of the science of storytelling over data. It allows people to change their mind and want to move forward in a different way. In order for your stories to be effective, though, and be compelling and people to want to know more, they have to be brief. And so we teach you how to do stories in, say, 5 or 6 minutes or less, because the kinds of stories that you need to tell, excuse me, we'll stay on brevity for a second. When you're telling stories as an advocate, you usually don't get very much time. So if you're telling a presentation, you could maybe tell a 10 or 15-minute story if you have that much time. But if you have a media interview, you usually want to have it be 6 minutes or less. If you're going to be giving testimony for a city council, for a public feedback, it's 2 to 3 minutes max and they cut you off. If you're at a Senate hearing, if you are talking to somebody on the phone to raise money, you need to tell a story very, very quickly. And same goes for a blog post. And then, of course, for social media, it's even quicker than that. And your stories need to be flexible in that any of the handful of stories that you decide you're going to tell for different needs that you have for your advocacy, you want to be able to lean into something about that story that will be relatable to that audience. So, for example, if you were talking to a business association, a Main Street association, and not a parent-teacher association, and you want to talk about why these crosswalks or these intersections need to be put in to have children be safe, you would say, well, we also want it to be safe for everybody who comes shopping in your district. When streets are too fast, people don't stop to shop. When streets are too fast, as Jim pointed out, people can't get across the street. And a place that calls itself a shopping district isn't much of a shopping district if people can't browse and move about, have lunch in one place, shop in another, cross back and forth, all of that. So you want to make sure that your story leans into what is important to that audience. And then you want to have narrative transportation. So this is a wonky term that Jim touched on that basically means you lose yourself in a story. It's the reason why we can go and sit in a movie for 3 hours and want to turn around and watch it again. It's the reason why we stay up until 3 o'clock in the morning reading our favorite novel. Transportation is about your delivery and your performance. Now, I'm not just being a geeky theater kid. It turns out that science is proving that the more engaging and compelling your delivery is, the more opportunities you have to change hearts, open minds, and motivate people to action. So this is where I do my pitch to invite you to develop a storytelling practice, because you're going to start finding that the better you tell the story, short, brief, interesting, compelling, the more people want to invite you to tell it again for another group of people. And that's what I want for you. I want for you to be so compelling at telling your story that you're not just reaching out to city councils and mayors and business districts and others. They are coming to you and asking you to come and tell your stories. As an advocate, you want your story to also include a clear solution. So if you go to your city council and say, we have a problem, the streets are too fast for kids at this elementary school or all of our elementary schools, they'll say, well, that's nice. And then they'll put it aside, probably, unless there's somebody there in the council that's really passionate about it. If instead you bring them a clear solution, then they have something to really respond to. So for example, going with the school analogy, if you come to them and say, we need a crosswalk with a crossing guard, we need a lit intersection, we need this, that, and the other, suddenly people are like, oh, I can get behind that. And when you tell a solution story, it makes people feel less anxious and more connected to the community, more willing to talk about the issues and collaborate, and hold officials in positions of power accountable for change. This is all research from the Solutions Journalism Network, and this is exactly what we want. So make sure when you tell in the story, you wrap the end of it up with how we can now make this better for everybody. And as an advocate, you always want to call to action in your story. What do you want people to do because they just heard your story? And I left transportation up there, I apologize. So what do you want people to do? So make it very clear, very precise, and it's even better if, after they've heard your story, they can take an immediate, minimal, viable action. Why do we want to do this? Dopamine? Because if people take a small action, like clicking a like, they will feel like they did something to participate in making your goal happen. So, example of a minimal viable action could be you gave a presentation and people are going to give you their email addresses so they can be on your newsletter. They can be invited to take a survey. They can like a social media post. They could, if it was a social media post, an email newsletter, they could immediately write to a city council person. They could give you money. So you want to make sure that your minimal viable action, your immediate minimal viable action leads people to feeling great that they did this and to want to stay in your bandwagon to participate, show up, vote, give money, etc. So you want to get positive momentum going. Now, we're going to relate your strategic goal that we had you write down earlier to what Jim talked about. So what we're going to take right now are 3 minutes to have you think about what story is needed for your strategic goal, or stories, you might have a couple of them, and how will you tell it? Now, you might decide that you're not the one to tell the story, or that you're going to have to get permission to tell that story. So we want to take 3 minutes right now and just have you write down what story is needed for your strategic goal and how will you tell it. And then what we'd like to do is jump in and, of course, answer your questions, but also discuss this and have you share. So let's take 3 minutes right now and just, I'm going to time us, and just go ahead and write down what we've got here up on the board. What story is needed and how will you tell it? And Ari, I'm super glad that we're all geeky theater kids here. Now that you've admitted that, we'll be recruiting you. So again, we're just taking 3 minutes to write down for our own strategic goals, what stories are needed and how are you going to tell it? It might be a blog post you write next week. It might be a social media story. It might be something that you just got the idea as we were speaking, and you need to create a storytelling practice with your colleagues so that it can happen. There's all kinds of ways that you can put this together. So we just have a little bit over a minute left. So if you want to go ahead and share what you came up with in the text box, please go ahead and do that. If you have a question that you're ready for and you want to text it to us, you can do it that way, or you can raise your hand either way. But let's have a really great conversation about what's going on. And again, if Trini is still here with us, we're going to also check in with Trini and have her share about what she's been up to. So please text us or let us know that you have a question. Let us know you want to share, and let's have a fun conversation so that you come away from this class today feeling like you really learned a lot about how to start being a strategic storyteller.
So I can jump in real quick, Melissa.
Go
This is
ahead, please.
I'm the founder of It Could Be Me for those of us that haven't met each other yet. And we're a nonprofit. We're based in Boulder, Colorado, and it all stemmed from a crash that I endured where I almost got killed. I was riding my bike, and through the time that I've spent advocating, I have come to learn pretty much that I should not be here, that I should be another statistic. So because I have the privilege of being here, I feel that the least I can do is do everything possible to make sure that this stops happening to other people. As an example for what you guys were asking right now, I thought of how I've been successful in testifying and how that has been essential moving forward, not only for the way I see life and how success has been defined for me. I was contacted by Bicycle Colorado like almost immediately after my crash, and I was able to testify. And because I was able to witness not only how my testimony impacted the outcome, but others. And then the whole process, that really was like, that catapulted me to be able to do what I'm doing today and try to get more people involved. Now, I'm at a point where it's unbelievable to me, all the things that have been happening in the last 2 months. It's just one thing after another, and they have all been great, like point marks in my advocacy career, if you want to put it that way. But things that I never, if you would have told me 5 years ago that I was going to be doing this, never in a million years would I have believed it. First of all, that this would have become my life's work, or second of all, that I've been able to reach the people I have. And I can tell you that it's all through storytelling. I cannot stress that enough. I'm constantly changing the story, but it's obviously based on my crash, but depending, like Melissa was saying, depending who your audience is, depending what the situation is, I mean, and I've been able to really craft good arguments for our cause, and our cause being basically reaching zero traffic deaths. I was appointed, I applied, and so I share these things because I feel that I'm just kind of very intrepid in the sense that uh, I think about things too much, but sometimes I don't, and I just do it, and I just take a chance, and I think that's what we need to do. I was nominated for this committee, and I was selected a year later, and this committee is to advise Secretary Buttigieg. So it's beyond an honor. We're 25 of us, and we're from all walks of life. There's a lot of geeky theater kids. There's a lot of really techie people. There's advocates. It's a really interesting group of people. And, because that door has been opened, then I was invited to share my story at an event for the National Roadway Safety Strategy last week. So I flew again to Washington, D.C. These are all in-person events. I'm getting to meet people that are really the decision makers. And I can share with you guys that there's a lot of impetu to really change things. It's a connection. At this event last week, the panel was crying. In the main, everybody got up there, shared a personal story, had that connection. It was that viral, and it was really, really powerful. So knowing that people at that level are not only really working as hard as I can, but that there's also like this personal connection really, really makes it more compelling. And I think that's how we contribute, right? We're the faces, we're the people that this continues to impact on a daily basis, and that, sadly, it's just never going to go away. And yeah, and thank you guys for providing this resource, Melissa and Jim, because it's really there's no value for this. I think that's why I think we will continue to host these workshops just so people can really become our army of storytellers, as we always say.
We want, and that's exactly what we want. We want an army of storytellers. So we have a couple of people have talked here, shared in the chat box about stories that they want to be able to tell. And so what I'm going to ask each of you that have shared here. So we have Nancy Cox has shared that the story she needs to tell is from an adult in the bike education class. And Nancy, it looks like you don't know who this person is yet, but it's an ideal that you need a woman who has learned to ride a bike. And I would say that, yes, you want to find somebody who you can tell the story of that's learned to ride a bike as an adult and then is still riding her bike. And what I'm going to do is see if I can find see if a friend of ours who learned how to ride a bike as an adult it has any of her videos online that I can share with you, because she is an amazing person with Washington Bikes in DC that is now very involved in advocacy and has been for the past decade. So does anybody have a question specifically about storytelling that we touched on that we didn't make fully clear to you in the class, and that we can clarify now before we have a little bit more of a conversation about some of these comments that you had? So is there anything about narrative transportation? Is there anything about making sure your stories are short, making sure your stories are flexible and they can lean in, making sure they hit the right purpose? Anything that wasn't clear to you that we can jump in and clarify with you? Or are you guys ready to start talking about what you have written here? Looks like nobody's asking a question, so I think oh, wait a second. Is Michael, you're thinking?
Well, I do have
Michael's thinking.
I do have a little question.
Okay.
I was exposed to someone who spoke about protest culture, and he said protest culture. One of his outlines was protest culture is most successful when it puts the recipient of the message into a dilemma that cannot be solved other than going for the direction that you want them to go. So he called it the dilemma strategy, that forces the decision maker to take a side and doesn't allow procrastination. And I just wanted to raise that because I was recently exposed to that. Thank you.
Well, so let's think about this. That is actually what he's talking about. Is you're changing the chemistry of, he's told a story so compellingly that the person felt like they now saw the world through the eyes of the person who told the story, right? And so that's what you really want to get. Now, human beings are innately selfish. They always want to know what's in it for me. And so that's why you need to at least get on their side a little bit so they feel, you know, we come at advocates, we come at stuff really hard sometimes, and we shame people, and we think because we've taken on this behavior and we see how it saves lives and it's made our life so much better, or it saved our life, or it saved our children's life, that we're going to get people on the same page. But people are busy and they're worried about so many different things that your good cause isn't a good cause to them until they can relate to it personally, right? And so we've seen it time and time again with movies where they do it so well because they're entertaining people, and suddenly gay rights is becoming something that more people can relate to because they've used a famous celebrity as a grandmother for a gay person. Like in the case of Will and Grace, they used a very famous actor, Debbie Reynolds, as the darling of America that older generations could relate to. And if Debbie Reynolds could accept that her grandson was gay, then the rest of the United States could. And so as hard as it is to hear, as an advocate, we have got to use the same strategies if we want to be effective. If we just want to blow steam, we can do that. But if we want to be effective, we have to meet our audience where they are and bring them along with us. So
Could I add something to that?
yeah, please do, Jim.
Michael, I also think it has to do with who's telling the story. In the case of the 3-foot campaign at the California Capitol, at the state capitol, as much as I could, I would have the families of the victim communicate directly with the legislator. So, you know, having Calbike communicate with the legislator about the victim was one way to touch them. A far more powerful way to touch them is where the cases where the family would communicate directly with the legislator. So as you think about stories that might create that sense of dilemma for the decider, you might want to see whether the subject of that story is the one who can communicate that story to the decider. I also think you can create a dilemma for a decider by the way that you present the story. So the story can be the story, and you can finish that conversation by saying, "What should we do?" Or "What would you do if you were in this situation?" Right? You can frame whatever story you're presenting as a dilemma for that person to consider.
Michael, you have texted us here a story that you're sharing about healing diabetes through active transportation, which is a positive story. And let's see, you talked about don't miss that train again for state advocates who may be reluctant to advocate in Sacramento for healthy modes on behalf of the university-based hospital chain. So you are in Jim's neck of the woods. And so how, I guess my question would be, how are you going to be using that story moving forward? Is there a strategic way that you can use that story now, or you're thinking about that story now, that over the next year you could be using, let's say it's social media, let's say it's a media interview, something like that you can follow up. So wherever you are with your storytelling, you might have already told your story. So Trini's told her story many times now, and we've done op-eds, we've done different things, but we will have goals for Trini moving forward, like NPR interviews, right? So she's already been on television like Channel 7, that's great, but you can you can work on your storytelling if you're already quite good at it, like what's the next goal, right? And so the next goal, if you're already quite good at it, is that the media is inviting you to tell your story regularly, right? And so think about, as you write your goals today and your strategic goals of what you want to accomplish, what's the next media goal? So we did, hold on just a second, Jim, I'll finish this and then I'll turn over to you. So we did op-eds for World Day of Remembrance. That was kind of our goal this last year. But now moving forward into 2024, we'd really like to get some bigger publications focused on this, that are national publications or publications that are close to national publications, right? And so there are areas of the country where we get really good coverage. We get great coverage in Los Angeles. Damien, I don't think, could be with us today for Safe Streets for Everyone, but his team did a phenomenal job this year of getting editorial placement. But television is really, really important. So television and radio, is that on your dial about what you're going to be talking about? Jim, turning it back over to you.
Michael, I'm going to put on my advocate hat here and say that there are advocates for bicycling for public health within the public health agencies at the state level. And if it would be helpful, we can talk offline about who I know at the California Department of Public Health. It relates to storytelling in the sense that if you can put those stories in their hands, I like to think of those people within these public agencies as our embedded advocates, right? It's not that public agencies stand absolutely in opposition to the things that we're advocating for. Very often, there are very committed bureaucrats who are working within a framework that is established by legislators who may not be so committed to those goals, right? So we have inside advocates all over the place, and you can think about putting that story in the hands of that of that advocate, of that embedded advocate, because they're going to have access and contacts that you don't have. They're going to be part of
Absolutely.
conversations that you're not part of, and you want to make sure that they also have the benefit of having some engaging stories that they can share.
Yeah. So shall I respond shortly? The idea is to have the University of California Office of the President and the 6 UC hospital chains that are behind it, who
Yeah.
do have their own lobbyists in Sacramento, for them to understand that their big organization should be on the advocacy train towards the issues we're talking about, and that they have not understood, because they advocate for their reimbursements and other kind of medical technical issues. So that's where I want to go.
Understood.
We're
Understood.
excited. Let's talk about this, because we've done some work, as we said, with Multnomah County Department of Health, who is ready to be more of advocates, but they can't say it officially. But we could probably have some ideas for you on that. So let's get on a call with you soon about that. I want to make sure, as we wrap up today, the last couple of minutes, at the end, what I'm going to do is leave this open for about 10 minutes. And if any of you would like to start a storytelling practice, and you would like to invite somebody from around the country or Canada to be a friend, a buddy, to start a storytelling practice, please let them know your information, and then it's okay to reach out to you. And I want to let you know that the next class will be strategic storytelling number 2, where we're going to go into the advocates to map, so that you can start mapping out whatever story that you really want to focus on, or stories you want to focus on. And as I've said, in about an hour, I will share that map with you ahead of time in an email newsletter. And let's see, what else did I want to say? That's really about it. We're right on the end here. Michael, Jim has shared information with you about how to get in touch with us. If you think of a question for us afterwards, you're in the shower tomorrow and you go, oh, I wish I'd asked, please make sure you, because that's how it happens to me. Please make sure that you email us. You will be getting my email newsletter, like I said, again, in about an hour, and you'll know how to get in touch with me. And we want to hear from you. We'll be here together again in about a month. And also, I want to ask each and every one of you, if you have a testimonial to share with us here about how the storytelling classes and media relation classes are helping you in your work, we'd love to know it, because that helps us reach more people. And we are doing a survey for the next month. And so you've already seen it. I'll share it again with you. Please take a few minutes, 3 minutes for this first part of it. And you could win a 45-minute coaching session with us if you haven't won one before. So do it. Share it with your friends that are also in this work, because we want to know exactly where you are in your communication skills and media relations skills and storytelling skills, because that will help us better help you and shape the classes that we put together moving forward. So thank you, everybody. Your work is incredible. We were delighted to see new faces here today. Thank you very much. Absolutely wonderful people that you are. Let's create a movement together to be, as Trini called it, an army of storytellers to create safe streets for everyone. I'm going to close off my mic and leave it open for like another 10 minutes for you to share messages, either privately or publicly, with people to help start your storytelling practice. Thank you. And again, this recording will be shared with you in early next week. Thanks.